Hello, good morning. Welcome to Glasgow Rangers Nation with me, your host, Owen James, the channel that brings you all your latest Rangers news, guys, in what is becoming a very interesting off-season period of rumour, counter-rumour, of speculation and more speculation, of discussion and just genuinely, I genuinely don't know what's going on. You know what? We need players with passion. We need to sign some players before, before the the Panathinaikos games even, because this squad isn't good enough. Simple as. You know what? I can give you a quote. This was Terry Butcher said of an old firm veterans game. He said, "I haven't had the chance to kick a Celtic player for many years." And Nacho Novo once said, "No matter how much money was put in front of me, I'd never sign for Celtic." We need players with the same commitment, the players with the same passion and love for our club as Nacho and Terry had. That's what we need. That's what we need for this coming season. Russell Martin, needs to bring in players that are going to love the club, that are going to have the same passion and desire to run through walls for this club and have a real kind of heart to wear that shirt, that want to wear that shirt, that want to be here, that don't just want to pick up their wages and, enjoy the money. We want players that actually want to be at Rangers going forward. Look, we're going to talk Cameron Burgess this morning, this afternoon, this evening, depends obviously when you're watching the video. We're going to talk Kovama Poku. We're going to talk a little bit of finance situation with the Raskan transfer, the money, etc. What's the budget? Is there a budget? Are we doing things on the cheap? I don't know. Look, I'm not. I'll get to that. And we'll talk a little bit of Tony Bloom, who's obviously invested in Hearts and what that might mean for us as a club. Right, let's start off with Cameron Burgess. Cameron Burgess is the out-of-contract former Ipswich Town defender who has now left the club. Cameron Burgess is someone who is thought to be interesting Russell Martin. Now, we saw yesterday when it was announced that John Souttar has to have an operation on a hernia operation. We saw that there was kind of a real bereftness of talent in that centre-back room, isn't there? I think, if you think about going into that Panathinaikos game with no signings, you'd probably be looking at proper Nsiala or proper even Ben Davis playing as the two centre-backs if the season began tomorrow, and that gives me the fear. There's talk of moving James Tavernier to centre-back, but how can you move a player to centre-back who has zero positional sense and aerial duels-wise, if you look at his statistics, is one of the worst in the Scottish Premier League? That's statistic-based. So how can you do that? Surely your centre-back has to be dominant in the air, has to be positionally aware. You can't have someone whose positioning is awful and the aerial, that just is a recipe for disaster. So, moving Tav to centre-back would be an absolute disaster. I mean, why? Again, like, he can't defend, he can't tackle. Again, that's one of his worst things. He gets dribbled around a lot. Look at his statistics, guys. It's all there in black and white. That's not me hating on Tav. That's me using statistics to prove that he's not a very good defender. And also the fact that, if you think about it, he's best going forward, putting the ball in the box. He can't do that as centre-back. Would make no sense. So centre-back is a position that we do need to address. Now, obviously, it looks like we've missed out on Harry Darling. He looks to be off to Norwich City, the fool. We're obviously still rumours and reports around Connor Cody from Leicester City. But this is the latest one, Cameron Burgess. Let's have a little look at some stats and facts about Cameron Burgess. Cameron Robert Burgess, he's 29 years old, so he is an experienced player. And it does seem, in terms of the names we've been linked with at centre-back, the manager is looking for some experience in those centre-back positions. Maybe to supplement Souttar, maybe to replace Souttar. I don't know. That we can only kind of look at that. Now, look, say what you want about John Souttar, and I'm a huge fan of John Souttar's, but if it turns out that he's, delayed an operation to play for Scotland rather than to worry about Rangers and the Champions League, then big questions need to be asked about his commitment. I find it utterly ludicrous that a Rangers player would put playing for Scotland before playing for Rangers, because the majority of the Scottish support hate Rangers. So why would you put that before? It just makes zero sense to me. And I think John Souttar has let himself and the club down massively. But anyway, on to Cameron Robert Burgess, 29-year-old, born in Aberdeen. We can't hold that against him. At the end of the day, we'll have to be born somewhere. And he does have Australian citizenship, technically. So, that's positive. So he is 6'4". That's what 1.94 meters is in old measurements. I know you like your old measurements, guys. Has Australian and Scottish citizenship, is a centre-back, is a left-sided centre-back, which is interesting, obviously, with Nsiala. But that would kind of implement that Robin Propper may well be on his way out if we're looking at a left-side centre-back. As much as it was kind of delayed because allegedly Propper wanted to talk to Martin and Martin wanted to talk to Propper. Personally don't see it. I think Propper has been an absolute waste of money and a bit of a panic buy, and I think he's a player that does need to be shifted ASAP. So this is an interesting one. He's with Ipswich. Obviously, his contract expires on June the 30th. So once that deadline comes and passes, he will be free. Only a signing-on fee and wages will need to be paid for the player. As you can see, he's had a fairly full career. Came through the youth system at Fulham. Has played for Cheltenham, Bury, Oldham, Salford, Accrington, Scunthorpe and Ipswich. It's had a really varied career. 127 appearances for Ipswich, 5 goals, 5 assists, 73 appearances for Scunthorpe, 3 goals, 1 assist, 52 appearances, 6 goals, 4 assists for Accrington, 35 appearances and 4 goals for Salford, 31 for Oldham and 2 goals, 18 for Bury, who are obviously now out of business, Cheltenham for 17, and then obviously you can see the other stats for Fulham. Played 4 times for Fulham as well. So all his experience is in the English leagues, isn't it? It's all playing in the English leagues, and it does seem that a lot of the players we've been linked with in this transfer window are players from the English leagues. It seems we're heading back to England looking for those players. I think you look at the players we're linked with, it's all players that Russell Martin will be familiar with, and Russell Martin, I think, will feel that fit his system and fit his way of playing. Ipswich as a team play a very progressive, build from the back, passing-based style of football. So, this is what we're perhaps looking at. Now, Cameron Burgess was apparently offered a contract by Ipswich, a fairly big money contract to stay with them in the EFL Championship, obviously with them now just obviously been relegated from the Premier League. However, he turned down that contract and is looking to move on. Now, according to reports and his agent, there are only 2 clubs at the moment offering interest in Cameron Burgess. One is Rangers and the other is Valencia. And as I've said on previous video, this is not the Valencia of Rafa Benitez, Gaika Mendieta. This is a very different Valencia now. A Valencia that are struggling, a Valencia that have financial issues, a Valencia that are not very successful in Spain and will not be in Europe next season. So obviously something we have over them. Burgess is an Australian international, of course. Apparently he was offered a 2-year deal by Ipswich, which was turned down by the player. I think it's because he was worried about the fact that they've just signed Jacob Greaves. He would not have guaranteed first team football, so opted against signing the new deal because he wants to play first team football. In terms of last season, he made 18 appearances for Ipswich, played 1,540 minutes in the Premier League and had an 81.8% pass accuracy, passing it out from the back and building from the back, obviously being very important in the Russell Martin way of playing. It's a very interesting link to a player. Look, Cameron Burgess, he looks a good footballer. He looks a very sound footballer. And I think, given the injury to John Souttar, given how that is all sort of working out, and given the fact that at centre back our depth doesn't look great, does it? Other than Souttar, we have Leon King, who has struggled and I don't think has a future at the club at the moment. Propper, who looks a bomb scare and I think wants to go back to the Eredivisie, and Nsiala, who is a young lad still learning the game, and Ben Davies, someone we do want to get rid of. Leon Balogun has obviously gone already, so I think there was a need to bring in more than one centre back, and whether that's Connor Cody and Cameron Burgess. I think the original desire from Russell Martin was to bring in Connor Cody and Harry Darling, but now that Darling's off to Norwich, maybe this is the kind of next cab off the rank in a way, because Darling was a left-sided centre-back, Burgess is a left-sided centre-back, Cody's a right-sided centre-back. So it does look, like Rangers are looking for 2 new centre-backs, and it looks like Cody and Burgess could be the 2 that they're looking at. Interesting to see what becomes of this, if anything. But it does look like it's for another free transfer been linked with a move to Rangers. And I do want to talk a little bit about all these so-called frees and cheap players who have been linked with the club in a short while. And I will get to that, guys. I know there's a few concerns amongst fans as regards the transfer window and how it is progressing at this moment in time. Now, the other one, obviously, that is currently, seems to be moving towards a conclusion is the Kavama Poku deal. Now, it was reported by a number of sources that Kavama Poku is on the verge of joining Rangers, that he's turned down a number of teams to join Rangers. He looks very, 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 very good footballer. Again, he's not going to cost a fortune. He is a free transfer. He's out of contract with Peterborough. His wages, given the fact that he's just come from a League One team in England, are not going to be massive. So that is a situation that obviously will attract Rangers to the boy. He's a very, very good footballer, and someone that has been sort of targeted as being someone who could really rapidly improve. Could make major strides forward and could be worth an absolute small fortune in the future. So look, this is an exciting, interesting player. A really good quality player. Now there was rumours going around last night that maybe Leeds United were going to hijack this deal for Kavama Poku, and they were going to go and They were going to go for Poku. I'd kind of pour a little bit of cold water on that for 2 reasons. First reason I'd pour a bit of cold water on it is, I can't see Leeds, going for a player who played in League One last season and bringing him straight into the Premier League and expecting him to be able to compete in the Premier League. Now, the gap between the EFL Championship and the Premier League is massive. Every season it seems that the teams that go up from the EFL Championship to the Premier League come straight back down. That the gap is too big. Now, if the gap between the EFL Championship and the Premier League is massive, what is the gap between the EFL League One and the Premier League? And as talented as this boy is, and I'm sure he is, and look, I'm not saying that we should always go for second best, second rate, because I'm sure he's not that. But I can't see Leeds going for a player who realistically is not going to be a starter in the Premier League. Secondly, if this is a player that Kevin Thelwell and Dan Purdy have identified as being a player for Rangers and have run this past 49ers Enterprises and, of course, Andrew Kavanagh, I can't then see them saying, okay, we'll then advocate this move for Leeds instead. Not when it seems that there's been groundwork done, there's been, work done to try and get him to Ibrox. I really can't see Parag Marathe agreeing to then say, actually, no, let's throw all that in the bin, let him go to Leeds. I just think that's really unrealistic. So I think those reports were pretty much just his agent probably trying to drum up a little bit more cash for him, or drum up a little bit of more something for him. So I genuinely don't get that. I don't think there's any truth in that. Now, I do hope that this deal can be done sooner rather than later. Now, there was rumours going around earlier today that Rangers would have 4 done by Monday. I can't see that happening realistically in the next few days. It was Poku, Shea Charles, it was Connor Cody, and it was someone else whose name escapes me at the moment. I think it was Max Aarons. That was it. Whether that's the case, I realistically can't see it. I can't see 4 getting done before Monday's resumption of pre-season training. So look, Poku, I think is low risk. He's low. He's not going to cost a fortune. I think he's a player as well that you probably could then get rid of quite easily if he didn't work out. So look, it's a low risk signing. It's a good signing. I think he will be a success. He's got everything to be a success. He's skillful. He's quick. He knows how to beat a low block. He can go around a player. All the elements you need, I think, to bring in. So that's one I think that is definitely on its way. Another deal that looks to be kind of on the rocks is the Cyril Dessers to Ajax Athens deal. Apparently, Rangers are holding out for £5 million pounds, or 5 million euro. However, the Greek team are thought to not want to pay €5 million, favouring somewhere in the region of €3.5 million for the player. So it kind of has reached a bit of an impasse, apparently. So at this moment in time, the deal is on hold and could well collapse. personally, I would be absolutely devastated if this happened. I was, like I said, when I heard that Dessers was going to head off and it was going to leave this summer and go to Athens, it made my year, man. It made my year. But looks like he could stay. Gutted, genuinely gutted about that. Especially as, I don't think he fits Russell Martin's system. If you look at what Russell Martin wants from a centre forward, he wants a centre forward who's quick, has got a high press, can be aggressive with that high press. Dessers can't do those things. He's not fast enough. He's not aggressive enough either. So I don't think he fits Russell Martin's system. And I think the fact that Rangers were willing to sell him, is an indication that the manager was willing to let him go. Now, if the manager's willing to let him go, then clearly he hasn't got a future at the club. If your manager doesn't really want you, then that's kind of dropping you a bit of a hint that you haven't got a place at this club. So, maybe that if this deal to Ajax Athens falls through, that something else will come and someone else will come in for him, maybe. We can but hope. We can but hope. Right, look, I want to just address something that's been going around on social media. I know social media is a hideously poisonous place with a lot of, trolling and a lot of horrible comments. And let's face it, I get enough of it anyway off people. But look, one of the questions that's kind of been raised is what is going on with Rangers transfer policy? It seems to a lot of people that there is little change from how it used to be under the previous board. That all the players that are currently getting linked with Rangers are either very, very cheap or free or loans. So Aaron's loan, Poku free, Darling free, Burgess free, Shea Charles loan, Max Aaron's loan. There's kind of a Turgeman seems to be the only one, and Freegan the only ones that realistically have been spent some money. And there's been a kind of feeling within and some of the fan base, and I'm not saying I agree with this, and I want to make one thing clear. I am not slagging off the owners. I am not saying that the owners have been tight. I'm not questioning the way they're running it. I'm just raising what fans are saying and kind of trying to fill you in a little bit on what I'm hearing from people. Now, there seems to be a bit of a concern that the club is working very much on the cheap, that it's looking for lots of frees, it's looking for lots of cheap players. It's not willing to spend money. It's not willing to speculate, to accumulate. There's a concern, obviously, as was been suggested, that therefore will mean that we will struggle to keep up with them across the city because of the fact we're going for these free transfers, cheap players, players not on big contracts or big transfer fees. And I understand that concern and I understand that worry. Of course I do. And I get it. I think, look, I think all of us would love to see the club go and splash big money on players. But as I've said on a number of occasions, is that realistic anymore in this modern market for Rangers? No, it's not. The days of Graham Souness, David Murray, Walter Smith are gone. We don't have that financial power anymore. We don't want to head back to 2012. We want to make sure the club goes on and is financially successful and is obviously successful on the park as well. So you've got to kind of trust the process. And I hate that saying. You hear Mikel Arteta come out with that at Arsenal all the time. Trust the process. And they've won nothing in 6 years. So it's not something I want for Rangers. But obviously the English league is very different to the Scottish league. I think if you look as well how the 49ers enterprises have operated at Leeds United over recent seasons, you can kind of see a little bit of a similarity in the way things are being done. Now, obviously this season there is a difference, there's a step up because they've gone up to the Premier League. I think there will be a greater expenditure this summer than there has been in previous summers. But if you go back to last summer and the spend on players and the departures, Leeds United, last summer spent £32.4 million bringing in players, but they brought in £162.9 million in player sales. So they had a profit on their transfer window of £130.48 million. And I think, if you look at the way they operate, they, like I said, they sold Ruta for 46.7, Gray for 41.25, Somerville for 28.3, Sinistera for 23.4. They sold Kamara, ex of Rangers, for 10 million. Marco Rocca for 4.5, Charlie Cresswell for 4.5. He was a player that was previously linked with Rangers. Diego Llorente for 3.25 million. They then spent money on the following players. They spent money on Joe Rodon, 11.8. He was the biggest signing. Lagi Ramazzani, 7.7. Jaden Bogie, whatever he's called, 5.95. Tanaka, 4 million. Schmidt, 2.97 million. And then some loans for Manu Solomon and Joe Rothwell. So they don't tend to spend huge amounts of money. They tend to look for value. They tend to look for players of who they feel can come in and make a difference. And I think that is what we're going to see at Rangers. That we're going to see that players who command big fees will be sold in the same way that Somerville, Ruta and Gray were sold, who were three of their better players. In that season, they just missed out on promotion. So, the fact that Nico Raskan has been talked of as a £25 million player, I think that the likelihood is that Raskan is going to be sold this summer. And that if Villa do come up with the 25 million, which has been talked about, that they will accept that, because then that 25 million will be reinvested into player sales. Now, people talk about a 20 million budget. I don't think there is a 20 million budget. I don't know what the budget is. So let's be open and honest about that. So I think, the way that they've been told to operate, Thelwell, Purdy, is to look for value, to look for free transfers, to look for loans. First of all, loans with options to buy, certainly, because I think there's a hope that you kind of got to look at Max Aarons, you look at Shea Charles and say, right, we get them in with a loan with an option to buy. We generate income this season by selling players, by getting in, by progressing in Europe, by winning things in Scotland. We generate income that way. We increase the budget for next year. We can then afford to pay that little bit more for Shea Charles, a little bit more for Max Aarons, come next season. I think there's a concern, obviously, with the PSR and FFP considerations for Europe. We can't go out and spend vast amounts of money. So, we'd all love to go and splash 8 million, 7 million, 9 million, spending 30, 40 million. Realistically, can't be done. So I think the way that Thelwell and Purdy have been told to operate is that if money's come in, big bids come in for players like Nicolas Raskan, that he will be sold. And I think I'm 95% certain that Raskan will depart this summer, for about 20-25 million, and that money then will be reinvested into the playing squad. I'm pretty certain that a lot of the players that we see come through the doors in the next 2 to 3 weeks will be either loans, free transfers, or low budget signings, like Connor Cody for around £1.5-2 million, like Dor Turgeman for £3-4 million. It won't be vast sums of money on players. I don't think that's the way they're going to operate. You've just got to look at Leeds, look at the way they've operated at Leeds. Spending what they spent last season, I think €11.8 million, which is around £9 million, £9.5 million on Joe Rodon was the biggest outlay. That's not a lot in championship terms these days, given the championship budgets. You will see them spend more this summer. You've seen them linked with £22-23 million players because they've gone into the Premier League. Therefore, the budget is bigger because the revenue is bigger. So I think what you'll see is them being very financially responsible, very frugal with the cash, and working very much, if you want a kind of similarity, working like FSG at Liverpool or like Stan Kroenke at Arsenal, working very much within their means, not overspending, not vastly spending huge amounts of money, that it will be free transfers, loans and players for less than £10 million, less for than £8 million, let's say, for example, because they want to be financially responsible. And I think, there are some fans that will not be happy with that will say it's the same shit. It's a different board, but same shit. There's other fans that will see that is the way we have to go forward at this moment in time, because the revenue that we're generating is not as much as the other side of the city, who are generating 2 to 3 times what we're generating. If we want to be in the same position as them, then we need to play Champions League football. We need to win things. We need to generate cash the same way that they generate cash. And we've got to kind of trust the process. As like I said, I hate saying that. I hate that saying, but we have to trust the process. As if it brings success, fantastic. And hopefully it does bring success. And look, you can't always turn your nose up at free transfers and loans if they are good footballers. I think with loans, you've got to get loans with options to buy, not obligations to buy, or no option to buy in there. You cannot just bring in a straight loan, and you cannot bring in. I realistically, given the Oscar Cortez situation, do not want any more loans with obligations to buy, because it puts you up against it where you've got to buy a player, and Cortez is proving to be what. I mean, look, Oscar Cortez might work out, and he might come good this season. Apparently, he's heading back early to training, which is great. I mean, obviously the worry is that he'll pull his hamstring putting his boots on. But, you know what I mean. He could work out this season and be a fantastic footballer for us. He was a fantastic footballer that Youth World Cup for Colombia. And a lot of people rated him very highly. And he was fantastic against Hearts in that 5-0. I mean, you've got to hope that we can get that back. We can keep him consistently fit. Because if we can, hell of a player, it's going to be worth a lot of money. But the worry is that he's the same old Oscar Cortez he was last season. That he's going to be injured all the time. But, look, what happens? I don't know. That's the way forward. I do think that will be the way forward, that we'll go down the loan with the options to buy, the free transfers and low budget signings for the moment, as we try to work our way back up to being in a financial position to compete. Because at the moment we don't generate the income to be able to splash vast amounts on players. That's how it seems to me. I might be wrong. I'm often wrong. I'd love to know your thoughts, guys. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know your thoughts about this transfer window. Look, I agree. We need to get players in sooner rather than later. I think once the EGM's over, things will start to move. I think once pre-season training is back underway and Russell Martin looks at the squad and realises how shit some of them are, things will start to happen. I don't foresee any players in before Monday. I really don't. Obviously Lara Cameron came in because that was already agreed. Oscar Cortez came in because that was already agreed, although the club haven't had the nerve to announce it, given obviously his injury history. But I don't see any other players before Monday. I think once Monday's out of the way, we may then see Poku, Charles, players like that coming in. But I don't see that happening until after Monday's EGM. That's just my thoughts. I might be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope tomorrow there's a signing. I hope today there's a signing. I hope the next day there's a signing. I hope the signings over the weekend. Of course I do. Of course I do. But I'm being realistic here. I'm trying to be a bit more realistic. Right, let's just finish off with another story. Right, not technically about Rangers, but it could affect us in the long run. It's been announced that Tony Bloom, the Brighton owner, his proposal to invest in Hearts has been accepted by the Hearts shareholders, or the Hearts board, and that he will plough some 9.65 million into the Edinburgh club. Now, Tony Bloom has already become involved with Hearts, with the fact that he's allowed Hearts to use Jamestown Analytics, which is the data-driven software that he uses at Brighton and at his other clubs. Now, the concern has to be, and listening to Andrew McKinley, who is the Hearts chief executive, someone who I think we should have tried to poach for Rangers. I think Andrew McKinley would have been a hell of a lot better CEO than Elmer Fudd that we've got at the moment. But you look at Tony Bloom and you can't help but be impressed by him. Now, the concern for Rangers is that Hearts will become a team that will improve with a new head coach in Derek McInnes, with a new analytics-driven scouting system, with a new way of working in terms of buying players. Now, Bloom has a track record of success wherever he has invested. He owns Brighton, obviously in the Premier League, and Brighton have been phenomenally successful at finding players and then getting the best out of them for a couple of seasons and then selling them on for a massive, massive sum of money. Now, Brighton finished 8th in the Premier League last season, which was a fantastic achievement for a club like Brighton. No disrespect to them, but they're not a massive club in England. But they are a club that generate an awful lot of money in terms of transfers. And I think that's something that he will want to bring to Hearts. But, not only does he own Brighton, but he also has an ownership interest in Union Saint-Gilloise in Belgium as well. Again, he's gone in there. He's transformed their fortunes and turned them into a major force. He also has a share in Como in Italy. Again, Como in Italy have had Cesc Fabregas, the former Arsenal player, former Barcelona player, as their manager. and again are building for the future. This season they finished banging mid-table. I mean, Como finished 10th in Serie A, something that, would never have been heard of in the past. This is a guy who has a huge track record of doing well wherever he is. And I think the concern is that, as Andrew McKinley talked today about wanting Hearts to be a disruptive force in Scottish football, and someone who breaks up the status quo. Now, it is going to be tough to break the old firm. It always is, because, historically, Rangers and Celtic are the two biggest teams in Scotland. But, with Tony Bloom backing them, Hearts have every opportunity, with his money, with his analytics system that he uses so successfully at Brighton, to succeed. And it's a concern for Rangers going forward that Hearts could become a force. Now, it can be a concern. It could also be a positive thing that they could take points off that lot from across the city. But it's something worth considering that they may become a third force within Scottish football and a major force within Scottish football. Like I said, Tony Bloom has a track record of doing well wherever he's invested. Brighton, he owns, obviously. He has an ownership of Union Saint-Gilloise in Belgium, who've done very, very well indeed. I think they're in the Champions League this season again. And he's obviously had a great record at Como now as well. So he's already founding like that multi-club system to use and to move forward, like the City group, for example, like what FSG are aiming to do at Liverpool with I think they're trying to buy Malaga, I think, at the moment, and they own another club in America. So looking at the way that this works, Hearts could become a bit of a tricky circumstance, a tricky out next season for Rangers if they get their summer business right, and something worth keeping an eye on, I feel, with what is going on at Hearts. Guys, I'd love to know your thoughts on that one. Well, thank you for watching Glasgow Rangers Nation, guys. If you've enjoyed the content, please like, comment, share and subscribe as we try to build the channel towards 8,000 subscribers as soon as is possible. Thank you for watching, and remember always, we are the people.